Good afternoon. Thank you for attending this afternoon's workshop. My name is Terry Glavin. I'm an attorney at the Department of Procurement Services. On behalf of the City of Chicago, our department, Mayor Rahm Emanuel, our Commissioner Jamie Rhee, I want to extend our appreciation to you for taking time out of your work schedules to be here for our workshop today. We're going to talk about procurement fundamentals today, but before I get into the presentation too far, I want to give you my contact information so that you can feel free to reach out to me in the future if you have questions or you need a resource at the city. My email is my name, so it's Terrence, Terrence, .glavin at cityofchicago.org. My office number is 312-744-0851 and 0851. Glavin, that's Terrence.Glavin, that's Glavin at cityofchicago.org. And I'll stick around afterwards if anyone needs to make sure they have the right information. So we are going to talk about procurement fundamentals today. As we get into that material, I want to remind you, this is just one of many workshops that DPS presents, so please check the workshop schedule. There are a number of opportunities to learn about procurement in our programs. We have a workshop schedule outside as well as online, so feel free to check those schedules. Now, to get into procurement fundamentals, I think it's important to get to understand who you'll be working with as we go through this process. First of all, you'll be dealing with the Department of Procurement Services. We are the contracting authority for the City of Chicago. It is our job to make sure that we have an open, fair, timely process. And ultimately, what we want is we want public trust in our contract awarding process. And so we do everything to make sure that there's integrity in the system, and that way everyone gets a fair opportunity at having city business as part of their portfolio. In addition to that, you have your expectations met, that the system is reliable, that you can have a confidence in the fact that it's a fair competition. And I'll talk a little bit more about why the process is competitive in nature. When you're getting involved in the procurement process, you're going to find that we as a department, we as a city, all of our clients, all the other departments in the city, that just like in any industry, we start speaking our own language, right? And there's sometimes a presumption in your industries as well. You start speaking your own language, sometimes you forget that folks that are new to your system don't necessarily speak your language. That's not intuitive. So it's a good idea to become familiar with the terms of the procurement process. And I'm just going to move back here. So a couple things I think you're going to want to know. Contracts. You're in business, you're probably familiar with contracts. Contracts are a binding agreement between two parties. They create the rights and responsibilities and create your expectations once you have your business relationship. So the goal of the Department of Procurement Services is to put contracts in place between you and the departments of the city. Those are going to be your future clients or customers. And those contracts that we put in place with the departments create that business relationship, which once that contract's in place, it's not a whole lot different than the private sector. But the process leading up to that award of a contract or contracts is significantly different than the private sector. Okay, and it all goes back to having fair competition for contracts. When you see an opportunity, whether it's in the newspaper or online, you're going to either come in or electronically receive a bid package. A bid package is the package we put together with all the specifications of what we want to buy as a city, what the requirements are for bidding or submitting a proposal, when your bid or proposal is due. And so a bid package needs to be picked up. And a little tip, when you pick up a bid package and you tear it open, read every document carefully, because at the end of the day, by law, contracts are awarded to typically the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. And one of those elements is responsiveness. Responsiveness means, among other things, that you bid the way we asked you to. So where we asked you to submit certain proof, you submitted it with your bid. Where you were supposed to sign something, you signed it. And all that goes into responsiveness. And I'll talk a little bit about responsibility later as well. We all, I think, have a general idea of what low bid means, but I'll talk a little bit about that as well. Addendums. Well, what if we put out an opportunity and circumstances change between the time you pick up a bid package and the time that we actually receive bids? Then we might do an addendum. And that's where we send out written notice saying something has changed in the bid package. And you have to acknowledge that change so that we know that you're bound by that new element or that new change when you submit your bid. There might be several addendums, so keep track of when they come out. Now, an addendum should be distinguished from a clarification. A clarification doesn't necessarily change what's in the bid package. A clarification is something that merely clarifies something that maybe is not, again, intuitive in the bid package. And that's often the result of, for example, a pre-bid conference where vendors come in and ask questions, and then we realize things aren't as clear as we thought they were when we put out the bid package. And then lastly, amendments or modifications on this page. That's when a contract's ultimately awarded, and during the life of the contract, we make changes to the contract by agreement, if it's an amendment, or modification, if it's something the Chief Procurement Officer needs to change. But a modification or amendment is during the life of the contract once it's awarded, and it changes the rights and responsibilities to some extent between the parties. What about bids? Bids are the documents you submit when you want to compete for a contract. Okay, it's all the documents that we say you have to submit when you're reading through that bid package and you see what the requirements are. Now, what if we're not awarding something by competitive bid? What if we are going through what's called an RFP? An RFP is a request for proposal, and it's typically for professional services that cannot be simply awarded to the lowest bidder. I sometimes use the example, if you yourself need a doctor. Well, do you typically go to the, well, I shouldn't say go to the Yellow Pages anymore, but you go to the internet or Yellow Pages or newspaper and just go and look for the best deal, where there's a coupon for a doctor or what's the cheapest price? No. When you want professional services, you typically balance your budget with getting the best quality possible. And so the law allows us to follow what's called an RFP, or request for proposal process. So instead of a bid, when you respond to an RFP, you submit a proposal, which is a persuasive written document telling us why you're the best vendor at the best value. Then there's requests for qualifications. It's just like an RFP, except it's under the circumstance where we want to create a pool of vendors. Let's say there's a scope of work that's going to be needed on an ongoing basis, but we don't know exactly the details of it yet, or when it's going to start and when it's going to stop. Then we might need to create a pool of vendors, so we have vendors at the ready when work needs to be done, and then we go to the pool that was created by an RFQ, or request for qualifications, and then the vendors in the pool get solicited for individual task orders that are specific projects within the pool created by the RFQ. Now, instead of a proposal or a bid, if there's an RFQ out there creating a pool, you submit your qualification. It's like a resume. It's like saying, hey, I see the scope of work in your RFQ, your request for qualifications. I'm giving you my corporate resume, which is going to justify that I'm qualified to do this type of work for you. And then if you get qualified, you get into the pool, and then you are eligible, among others, to get potential task orders. Now, when you're involved in city contracting, what is extremely important is participation by historically disadvantaged groups. And what we do as a city, among other governmental units, is we certify firms as being historically disadvantaged business enterprise, or broken down into categories, MBEs, minority business enterprises, WBEs, women-owned business enterprises. If there's federal funding, DBE perhaps is the designation. That's disadvantaged business enterprise, which is at the federal level, more or less, the MBE and WBE considered as one. We also have BEPD, that's business enterprises owned by people with disabilities. And we also have programs for veteran-owned businesses. Now, I don't want to turn this into a lecture on the law, but it never hurts to get familiar with the laws that underlie why we do what we do. So if you go to the Chicago Municipal Code under 292-420, you can get yourself familiar with the city's minority-owned and women-owned business enterprise procurement program. And it's for contracts other than construction. MBE-WB goals may be met through direct participation, such as forming a joint venture, and a certified MBE-WBE, and can be the use of an MBE-WBE subcontractor in the performance of the contract. So what does all that mean? It means that by law, we have goals of having participation by certified MBEs and WBEs. The laws set up percentages of participation. So if you're a prime contractor and you get the award of a contract, and the award of the contract in its details says that you have to have, for example, participation of 25% MBE, 5% WBE. What does that mean? That means that you as the prime are going to hire both a certified MBE, at least one, if not more, and a certified WBE, one or more. And they're going to participate 25% MBE and 5% WBE in my example. So that means you're going to have the MBE perform 25% of the real work, and the WBE perform 5% of the real work in return for 25% of actual dollars that flow through the prime, and 5 for the MBE, and 5% of the dollars that flow through the prime to the WBE. Simple example, if we award a contract for $100,000 to a prime contractor, and that prime contractor has MBE, WBE subs, out of that $100,000 contract award, the MBE will perform real work and make $25,000. The WBE will perform real work and make $5,000. Will be paid. Will be paid $25,000 of the contract. Now, what I'm going to do, I mentioned this, or it was mentioned earlier. If it's okay, I'm going to reserve questions till the end, and then I'll be glad to stick around and take questions and provide answers to you. Okay. Just so that we can move through the material. And I'll leave plenty of time so that we can stick around and answer all the questions. Okay. Now, you can also, in certain circumstances, get indirect participation to qualify. Now, I just described direct participation. What if there, and this does happen, there are not certified firms in the area of specialty that you need work for? Because when you certify a firm, when the city certifies an MBE or WB, we certify them in specialty areas under what's called the NAICS code, and I can give you a little information on that later. And by the way, there's a separate workshop on certification, so specific topics like NAICS codes and how to get certified in specialty areas will be covered in that workshop as well. So let's say you have a certain type of work that's needed, you're a prime, you have these goals you have to meet, and there's no one certified in your area. Well, if you show good faith efforts that you exhausted a search and there's really no one out there, then what you can do is you can demonstrate that you have MBE and WBE firms doing other work for you. It might not be on that contract, but they're doing other work for you. And like perhaps working on your headquarters, building out offices in your headquarters, you know. So in other words, they're doing some work for you and getting paid, that you can get approval to have that be applied to participation on a city contract. But it's not automatic. It has to be demonstrated that there was an exhaustive search, diligence was used, and you have to prove up there was good faith efforts. So goals may also be met through indirect participation. It could be purchase of supplies or materials from the MBE, WBE, and it has to be in the ordinary course of business. In other words, you can't just fabricate this type of relationship. It has to be a relationship that you've had with MBEs and WBs, or that you're having with MBE, WBs that's real. And then in order to receive credit, The MBE or WBE firm must perform a commercially useful function. Okay. I talked about reductions or waivers. There can be, actually this is different than indirect participation. There can be a reduction or a waiver, again, as long as there's good faith efforts. So a contractor is not entitled to a reduction or a waiver of these goals during the performance of the contract, but, and I'm paraphrasing, in writing you can request a reduction or a waiver, and again, it has to be documented that you exercise diligence and good faith efforts to get participation. A contractor seeking a waiver or reduction of these goals must demonstrate to the satisfaction of our Chief Procurement Officer, the CPO, that there was good faith efforts to meet the utilization goals. I mentioned commercially useful function. I think the key elements of commercially useful function are that the certified firm are actually performing, managing, and supervising the work involved. So there's more detail, but at the end of the day, those are some of the key cornerstones of whether or not a firm is performing a commercially useful function. Okay? City's Department of Procurement Services counts MBE, WBE, and DBE expenditures towards goals only if the certified firms are serving a commercially useful function on the project. So, it goes back to my example. It's not just getting dollars paid to certified firms regardless of whether they do work or not. That's not the only goal. The goal is to not only have the certified firms paid so that they can take part in the financial benefits, but it's also that they perform actual work. And one might say, well, if they're getting paid, what does it matter? It matters because the goal of the program is not just to get the certified firms paid, but to have them build capacity. And the way you build capacity is through work experience. And so they actually have to perform on the contract, get experience working on a city contract, its compliance requirements, its performance standards, with ultimately the goal being that firm, perhaps with the financial benefits and the capacity building benefits together, they might grow ultimately to become prime contractors, or at the very least to get more subcontractor work. At the end of the day, it benefits the MBE, WBE certified firms and DBE firms, but it also benefits the procurement system, because the theory of public procurement is competition drives prices down. So if we build a stronger vendor community with more competition, what is the end result, at least in hope and theory, is that prices will go down. So it benefits historically disadvantaged firms, but it also benefits the procurement system in general, and hopefully in the long run saves taxpayer dollars. Now, I moved this procurement term on a little later because I think it falls better into this section, but target market. There are some projects where we will solicit certified firms only first. Now, if no certified firms bid, the opportunity could go back out to market generally, so not limited to certified firms. But a target market project is limited to competition by certified firms first. If you're interested in finding a little bit more about this, Chicago Municipal Code, Section 2-92-460. Should know it by heart, but I don't have my glasses on at the moment. But 292-460 is, in fact, the Municipal Code section. And by the way, as I cite Municipal Code sections, the official publisher for the Chicago Municipal Code is available online. It's amlegal.com, AMLEGAL.com. And if you go to that website, it'll give you a whole bunch of jurisdictions, not just Chicago. But you can click on the map, then click on State of Illinois, then click on City of Chicago, and then you'll work your way. It's pretty user-friendly. You can get to the Chicago Municipal Code. And by the way, 2-92 is the section of the Municipal Code that generally enables or empowers our department. It creates our department, and it lays out our authorities at a sort of mid-level, lays out the detail of what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to do it. So it's a good thing. I know you're busy with all your work schedule and your normal business operations, but it's not a bad thing to go there and start learning a little bit about why we do what we do. I've always said that it's competition, right, by law, and to be a good competitor, it's helpful to know the rules of the competition. And so I encourage you to go to the Chicago Municipal Code, learn about the structure of why we do what we do. Now, at a more detailed level, go to cityofchicago.org/procurement, and on our webpage, you'll see policies and procedures. That gives you even more detail about how we do things and why we do what we do. At the highest level, the Illinois Municipal Purchasing Act is the law that creates sort of the umbrella that everything, or that most things fall under. So you have, at the highest level, Illinois Municipal Purchasing Act for population over 500,000 people. That really lays out the law about, lowest responsible bidder, how you're supposed to advertise and things like that. And then it breaks down further with the Chicago Municipal Code, and then policies and procedures at the department level are finer detail. If there's federal dollars involved, federal law may and typically does apply. So, but I'm not going to turn this into a federal law lecture, but I just want you to be aware that there's a number of laws that guide us and tell us how to create the most truthful process, a process with integrity. One little note on target market construction projects may not be bid as target market procurements. This is a summary. This is a summary of certification. And I talked about most of them. So we have MBE, Minority Business Enterprise, WBE, Women-Owned Business Enterprise, BEPD, Business Enterprises Owned by People with Disability, DBE, Disadvantaged Business Enterprise. But what I haven't mentioned yet is ACDBE, Airport Concession Disadvantaged Business Enterprise. I can say it faster every time. That is if you are doing business out at the airport. So if you want to get the certification because you want to do business out at the airport, ACDBE is the certification you also might want to look into. Basic eligibility requirements. 51% ownership is sort of the backbone of certifications. But it goes beyond that. You can't just have an ownership interest and then be off-site, out of state, relaxing while this company is on autopilot being run by other non-historically disadvantaged individuals or groups. You have to control. You have to manage the company. You have to bring to the table experience that is within the type of work the company is doing. So it has to be a meaningful ownership, not just some stock that you have in the company. Similar ownership requirement, 51% for BEPD. As far as outside certifications, keep in mind, City of Chicago accepts Cook County certifications as well. So you can go to Cook County. They have a certification process. And if you get certified through Cook County, we will honor that certification. I'm going to talk about economic disclosure statements, but before I do, let me just say this about certification. If you believe you're eligible to be certified, or your company is, get started right away. You don't need to have an opportunity in mind. So you don't have to wait to get certified because you don't have an opportunity in mind yet. You can start the application process, get your paperwork together, get certified without having an opportunity in mind. And why do I say you should get started? Because we take this actual certification seriously. It is reviewed, it is investigated, and it takes time. Now we expedite, we move things as fast as we can, but it does take time because there is a vetting process to make sure that individuals that are benefiting or groups that are benefiting from this program actually are the ones that should be benefiting. So it takes time, so get started right away, and that way you'll have your certification when the opportunity presents itself. You can also use the certification to network with other vendors. So you can find subcontracting opportunities, and it's helpful to have that certification ready. Lastly, in the private sector, there are opportunities being given to city-certified MBE and WBE firms. Now, that might not be city contracts, but there are private companies that are procuring goods and services out there for their own business endeavors. And There is I think, a strong push for supplier diversity in the private sector, just like there is in the public sector. And a lot of companies have certification processes of their own, but not all do. And for those that do, and especially for those that don't have their own certification process, the city certification is a reliable credential that you can market to private companies as well, to say, look, I've been vetted. I will legitimately add to your supplier diversity efforts. And so you can market the certification to private companies. So it's helpful in many ways. So I encourage you to get started on your certification process because it'll be helpful to you going forward. On the flip side, keep in mind, you do not have to be certified to bid on city business. You could be eligible and decide, I just do not want to go through the process of being certified or maintaining my certification, or for a variety of reasons. We have vendors that would be eligible but choose not to. And the reason I mention this is, say as you're sitting here today, you get excited, you go to the DPS website or you go to the newspaper and you see an opportunity. And it is a opportunity generally open. It's not target market. It's not exclusive to MBEs and WBs. And you say to yourself, well, I'm eligible for MBE WB certification, but I don't have my certification yet, so I'm not going to bid on that project. Well, no, it doesn't work that way. You don't have to be certified to bid on a project. And it doesn't matter that you're eligible for certification. It's just you won't get benefits of the program if you're not certified. But you can still bid even if you're not certified yet. So keep that in mind. Don't let it hold you back that you don't have your certification line. Now, whenever you're doing business with the city, in fact, whenever you're moving the city to take some type of city action, including the award of a contract or the update of a contract, state and municipal code law requires that an economic disclosure statement be made. It lets us learn about vendors to make sure that they are eligible to do business with us. Things like making sure they're not debarred by us or another governmental entity, making sure that we know who dollars are flowing through to. And in order to make sure we have that information, the law requests or demands of us that we get economic disclosure statements, or EDS, from anyone that owns or has a beneficial interest in the prime that exceeds 7.5%. When I say prime, I mean the vendor that has the direct contracting relationship with the city, the one that was awarded the actual city contract. So if there's a prime that is awarded a city contract, we need to get EDS filings from anyone that owns 7.5% interest, beneficial interest or more in the prime. So what does that mean? That means that, let's say, for example, a prime gets an award of a contract, and let's say there's a company that owns that prime contractor. So that second company owns the prime, and that second company owns 100% of the prime. Well, we need an EDS from that second level business entity. So you might say, oh, well, you're done there. No. Let's say that that second level company is owned by 50% by a third company and 50% by a fourth company. Well, then each of those third level companies own 50% indirectly of the prime. We need their EDSs. Now let's say there's a bunch of individuals at a fourth level that own those two companies. Then we have to do the math and figure out what percentage indirectly they own in the prime through those multiple levels. So if, for example, at that fourth level you have somebody that owns, let's say, 14% of the company at the third level, who owns 50% of the prime, well, then we still need an economic disclosure statement. Oh, actually, no, we don't. I used a bad example. Let's say they own 60% of the 50% owner of the prime. Then they have an 8% interest in the prime indirectly, and they have to file a economic disclosure statement as well. I don't want to bother you or put you all to sleep with much more math, but the point being is that it's a thorough vetting of who's receiving city dollars. And vendors that are not eligible to do business with the city or ineligible individuals, the EDS is meant to flush them out so that they can't avoid our knowledge of them through creative structuring of businesses and ownership levels. And so it's a pretty thorough disclosure. And I tell you all this because the EDS is to be filed online. And not only if you're the prime do you have to get your EDS online if you're going to get a contract, but you got to urge the owners above you to get their EDSs filed online because they have to certify themselves. So the process takes time. So get online, just like with certification of MBEs and WBEs, get online. The link is on the City of Chicago /procurement webpage, cityofchicago.org/procurement. There's a link to EDS. Get in there, log in, start getting familiar with the EDS forms and process. And as soon as you need to get your EDS filled out, get on it because we have to get that EDS completed before we can award the contract. And so it's important to get that done. So that is some of the information about the EDS. Now, I'm going to talk towards the end as we're closing out about the DPS website. But I want to get a little more detail for you about some of the items I talked about. One is the competitive bid. Now, there's a separate workshop doing business with the City of Chicago, getting a lot of detail about the whole solicitation and award process. But I want to fill in a few details. One is, I said earlier that contracts are typically awarded by competition, and they're typically awarded to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. Now, you'll find that requirement in Illinois state law, the Illinois Municipal Purchasing Act. And you can Google that phrase, the Illinois Municipal Purchasing Act, and I'm pretty much can assure you on the first page of your search engine result, you're going to get the Illinois statute on this topic. What it basically is saying is that contracts, especially commodities, those tangible goods, things that are commonly sold among several vendors, commodities are typically awarded to the lowest bidder that is responsive and responsible. Responsive is basically giving us what we want the way we want it. That starts with your bid that you submit, crossing your T's on your documents, dotting your I's, signing where there are signature lines. If a project requires a performance and payment bond that you include with your bid package, a performance and payment bond, or whatever other forms are required. And it continues to being responsive all the way to, if we order police cars that are 4 doors, that you don't expect that you're going to be able to deliver 2-door police cars to us that contradict what our specifications say. So responsiveness is giving us what we want the way we want it. Responsibility, that third element, is being presently capable of delivering what we want the way we want it. So if you have the equipment, the personnel to perform the work that we need done in the quantities that we have estimated, then you're most likely presently capable. If you don't have the equipment to perform, or you don't have all the personnel, then you might not be presently capable and you might not want to bid on the project. You might want to see who's bidding on it and maybe you can get a subcontracting opportunity out of it. But what happens is if you submit and you are either not, if you are not the responsive bidder or you are not responsible, we will reject your bid for those flaws. And you'll receive a bid rejection letter in the mail that says thank you, but you've hereby been rejected because you are not responsive or you are not responsible. But at the end of the day, if you're responsive and responsible, then we're going to match your bid against the other bidders and award to the lowest priced bidder. Now, this process also applies to work services. What are work services? Easy way to describe it in procurement mindset is anything less skilled in nature than a professional service. That doesn't really tell you anything, so I want to give you a little more detail. A work service is still extremely valuable to the city, but it's more common in nature. It doesn't require all of the skill sets that professional service providers provide. An example is landscaping services. Obviously extremely valuable to our city. We like to have our city look great. It's not a good, it's not a commodity, it's a service. But as long as you're licensed to do business in the city and you've got the certifications of landscaping, it's not treated by law as a professional service the way healthcare, like a doctor providing service is treated. So we competitively bid work services the way we do a commodities, because they're common in nature, provided by more than one vendor. So as long as you meet the responsibility requirement that you're presently capable, then we are just going to compare you against other low bids and award to the lowest bidder. Now, if you rise to the level of having a skill set that is considered professional service, like a healthcare doctor, I keep saying, or maybe an accountant might be another example, then we will typically go through the RFP process I mentioned earlier. If we're going to award one contract to one vendor, or if we're going to award multiple contracts but not have a pool, we have a set amount of work that's going to be awarded for a specific period of time, we'll award an agreement or a contract through the RFP process I described earlier. Professional services, as I mentioned earlier, are also awarded through the RFQ process. And to give you a little more detail on that, let's say that you submitted your qualifications and you are qualified. You will receive what's called a master consulting agreement. That master consulting agreement is a contract, and it puts you in a pool. It tells you a broad scope of work that you are qualified for and that you're in that pool. You might never get solicited for any work out of that pool. That's the nature of RFQs where we create pools. But we don't go through these exercises of putting out master consulting agreements just for fun. We expect that there's going to be a work for the vendors that are in the pool. When there is, we will solicit the pool and we will award to the vendors, and the work will be within the scope of the MCA, but it'll be project specific and date and time specific, or date specific. And what you'll get if you're awarded work under a project is you'll get a task order. A task order is like a mini contract within the scope of the master consulting agreement. And you are obliged to perform that mini contract or that task order until that project's complete. And when you complete that project, you go back in the pool. And you wait for another opportunity to be solicited for work. Every master consulting agreement has a lifespan. It might be 5 years, it might be 4 years, it might be 3 years with some extension options. But at the end of the day, that master consulting agreement will come to an end. And when it does, we'll go back out with a RFQ, and vendors out in the world get a chance to get into the pool, and you get a chance to get out of the pool if you want, or to compete again to be back in, or qualified to be back in. The benefit of it is during that life of the MCA, those outside vendors that didn't compete or get qualified, they can't compete for the task orders during those years that the master consulting agreement exists. So there's a benefit to being in that pool. You get any opportunities that are out there exclusive of vendors that did not compete by submitting their qualifications. Now, I get into even more detail. I teach other workshops. I get into more detail in doing business with the city of Chicago, like the nature of the drafting of the specifications. Once you get a contract award, your business relationship with the departments that are out there, and what your expectations can and should be beyond contract award when you have that business relationship, how you get paid. And I get into that in a workshop doing business with the city of Chicago. So I encourage you again, check online, check the workshop schedule outside, stay informed of what workshops are going on, because there's a lot of material out there. We have experts in several different areas of procurement, and we've assigned those experts to specific topics. Now, not all the topics might be relevant to you, but you never really know for sure until you sit down and listen to the materials. You might be surprised at what topics are relevant to you, so I encourage you to attend as many workshops as possible. You can also learn a lot by wandering around the website that we have. Our website is very full as far as resources regarding procurement is concerned. We have awarded contracts and modifications. We have information that you can pull up to see when vendors have gotten paid that have contracts, how much they've gotten paid. You can see bid tabulations. So when a competition takes place, we post what the bids were. So you can actually see, going back, what competitors actually bid when they were competing for contracts. This is pretty useful business intelligence for a vendor because it gives you an idea, especially if you're new to public procurement or you're new to your industry even, and you are not so sure of that range you should be in to be competitive with your pricing. You can go on, look at bid tabulations, and get a good idea of where vendors have been with their pricing in the past. Now, there's no promises that every vendor is going to bid the same amount going forward, but it gives you a ballpark figure. And you can presume that prices might have gone up since the last time there was a bid tabulation on a certain type of work you want to do. So you can build that in. Or maybe you are so familiar with your market, you know costs of supplies that you need have gone down. Maybe you can come in extremely competitive and come underneath those previously tabulated prices. So there's a lot of business intelligence you can gain from our website. I'm sorry? You can see the bid tabulations from the past. You are able to see what other bids were on previous projects. Not just a low bidder. Sir, have you looked? You're nodding yes, sir. Have you looked online and seen? And you've seen, yeah, more than the low bidder. Okay. I'll be glad to stick around and sure. I'm sorry. Right. So I can stick around for sure. And oh no problem at all. Actually, it's a very good question because we want to get that information out there. We want to be transparent in our process, but for the reasons I just described, we want to make sure that you know what's out there. So it's a very good question, and if perhaps there's a reason why it was not located, I want to be of assistance to you and try and be helpful to you. Or if there is a flaw in a process, we want to make sure that we address it for sure, or in our postings. So I want to make sure of that. So I will stick around for discussion of that matter. Also, weekly bid opportunities are posted online. You can actually see what opportunities are out there and upcoming. And that's in addition to a general amount of knowledge you can gain from looking at items like the buying plan that Irma described before the session began. So there's a lot of intelligence out there you can gain. You can gain new certification initiative information. And if you're looking around for participation by WBs and MBEs so that you can bid on a project, you can go to our MBE WBE directory and find certified firms. And if you're a certified firm, you can also use that directory to network. Perhaps you don't have all the equipment or human resources to compete for a project, and you want to get together with another complementary MBE, WBE, and joint venture to compete for a project. That's one way to get information about other complementary firms that are out there. Because keep in mind, joint ventures, when you get together and form a team effort to compete for a contract as a prime, that's always an option for you too. And all this is available at cityofchicago.org/procurement. We are very active online, Twitter, Facebook, in addition to our department's webpage. Follow us, get in touch with us online. It's one of the best ways to stay informed about what's going on at the Department of Procurement Services and what's going on in city business. And don't forget, you can also get a good idea if you're new to city business. You can go to cityofchicago.org. Up in the menu at the top, you look at government. The drop-down menu will show you the list of all the city departments. Start looking at the department's web pages. Each of them will describe what their mission is, what they do, maybe upcoming plans that they have. And it gives you an idea of who are the customers out there. Because as I described earlier, your business relationship is with each department. right? We are the contracting authority. We award the contract. But you're really not doing business with procurement services. Once we put that business relationship together, you're doing business with one of or several of the departments out there. So find out who those departments are. Find out what they're doing, what their needs are. And you might realize that's a potential client of mine. So I'm going to monitor solicitations that are in regard to that department or several. Also, that same drop-down bar will take you to a link that takes you to sister agencies. Sister agencies have their own contracting authority. They have their own rules for procurement. They have their own opportunities. Don't miss out on those. In addition to City of Chicago business, look at their websites. See what opportunities are out there at sister agencies, because we do not procure for sister agencies like Chicago Park District, Chicago Transit Authority, Metropolitan Pier and Exposition Authority, and the list goes on. They have their own procurement authority. We might sometimes get together and joint purchase with them, but generally they are separate procurement. Those are separate procurement authorities that go through their own contracting process. Lastly, I want to point out, sign up for DPS alerts. DPS alerts will keep you up to date on upcoming opportunities. That you can receive those alerts electronically, and it's another great way to keep in touch with DPS and what's going on. So try and hit all those access points or connection points with us, and that's the way you're going to stay the most well-informed and, again, be the most competitive vendor that you can be for your own sake, also for the sake of our procurement system, and we would appreciate that. I'm going to wrap it up with, before we do questions, with thank you again for taking time. You've got your own work schedules, you're trying to run businesses, or you're employed at businesses and you're trying to get your work done, but you took time to be here and listen to me today. I appreciate that interest. The city appreciates it. I just appreciate your attention and hopefully getting something out of the presentation today. And I look forward to seeing you at future workshops here at the City of Chicago. And with that, I will open up the session for any questions and answers. And what we'll do is, if there are questions remaining, we will take them and we'll repeat your question so that it can be caught online clearly, and then I'll answer the question. If you feel like your question is very specific to your needs, or you feel like it's something that you just don't want to necessarily ask me in a group session, I am going to stick around. I'll be glad to answer questions after the session is over. So with that, are there any questions? Yes, sir.
I'll ask my question very specific.
Okay.
Whatever, let's say it's for and they're all read the numbers out, right? Wow. Right. And you have to be awarded, and then ultimately you are awarded the bid under the Freedom of Information Act, which is, I think, what you're referring to. That is your bid.
I'm going to interrupt you just because I didn't refer to the Freedom of Information
You didn't,
Act.
but
No, I'm referring to being posted online.
your bid, because you were the awarded, is posted online.
Correct.
You're also saying that the other four bidders who were not awarded the contract,
You can see what the other bids were online.
their actual line item bids are online as well.
Yes, and if I stand to be corrected, I will definitely flush that out if there's some glitch or some reason why you did not have access to it. But I think there's a gentleman in the room who has looked at this, and he indicated that he has seen competitive bids online.
I take extreme issue with that.
And if I am incorrect, and I'm open to being corrected for sure, I want to address it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look into it, and if I am incorrect, I'm going to make sure I confirm that with you and provide you with the accurate answer. But I think we have the accurate answer.
I've bid 40 or 50 contracts
Okay.
in my history, and never once has there been a line item posting of a non-winning bid online.
Are you talking about line item
The actual,
bid?
the line item bid,
Or are you talking about bid tabulation where the total bids are?
no,
provided?
you can see.
Then we're talking about two different things.
You can see that your competitor, you were the winner and you bid 2 million, and you were the low bidder, and he bid 2.2. So you can see that he bid 2.2 million. But his line item, how he arrived at 2.2, the addition of all of those line items.
That's not a bid tabulation. We're talking about two different things. That's why you're not wrong, but I'm afraid neither am I. And what it is bid tabulation is where we tabulate the total price and list them. And would you agree with me that that's online?
Yes.
And I agree with you.
Huge difference.
I never said.
I just wanted to.
Yeah, yeah. And for everyone else, I'm glad you did that because I think there was maybe a misunderstanding of what we were talking about, but I only use the word bid tabulation, and that's posted.
Sure. Because my competition for the future can see what my line item bids were.
And I never said that was posted.
Okay, but I can't know what they did, even though they were higher, because it's only the bid tabulation.
Total bid tabulation.
Then we are in agreement.
As we should be, sir. All right. Yeah, no, it's just, and what did I say? Learning the procurement language, right? We just didn't see eye to eye on one small term that changed the complete meaning of our discussion. And so I think this is a perfect example. I'm glad you made that example, or brought up that example, because it's a perfect one of miscommunication due to perhaps me not being clear that I was using a specific term, and our discussion resulted in a different direction. But thank you very much for bringing that up. Yes, sir.
I've been involved in offering pricing to the city in something called a quote or a bid or RFQ.
Yeah.
So what is the difference between offering a quote
Right.
and offering a bid or an RFQ?
Sure. If you go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, quote can mean different things. But for the city, I think the best way for me to break it down is this. If you are bidding on something that's a small order, and by law that's something under $100,000, then we put out a request for bids, but we put it out sometimes under the label of RFQ, request for quotes. So it is a little bit confusing because an RFQ is typically request for qualifications, right? But for small orders, when we're receiving bids, we ask for quotes. And one of the reasons for that is that by law, small orders are treated differently than those above $100,000. I don't know if you want to call them large or regular orders, but small orders are very specific under the law. There's a more flexible procurement process because it's smaller amounts. You can solicit by phone, fax, email. There aren't the advertising requirements that large orders or above $100,000 orders require. And the additional difference is your bid sometimes is called a quote, but it's the same thing. Now, that is different from, as I mentioned, RFQ. When we are saying the Q in RFQ, it is your resume, your qualifications that you're submitting. You are not necessarily submitting your price with that Q, with that qualifications. You're submitting your resume as and it could be a small company. It could be literally like a resume that you send in, as an individual for a job. Or, I mean, sometimes it's a data or enterprise project, huge, and big companies, conglomerates submit, and I mean, it could be binders and binders, key personnel, all their equipment, past projects for large municipalities they've done. So it could be a huge corporate resume, if you want to call it that. So, but at the end of the day, RFQ, the Q means qualifications. Small order, the Q means bid. Yes.
Are those bid calculations for those quotes available online as well?
The bid tabulations for small orders are, I believe, online. Now that is a better question that I'm going to make sure of. I believe quotes are tabulated as well, but let me double check on that for you. What I'll do is I'll take your information and either by email or call, I'll confirm that for you for sure. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Yeah.
Are there any other seminars or workshops or anything where key that you mentioned about executive performance, commercial, municipal function?
Okay.
We know that it goes beyond that, besides them supervising, directing the work.
Right.
There are other criteria that must be met.
Absolutely. You're,
Also,
yes, sir. I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you. Go ahead.
no, I'm just wondering, is there some kind of a workshop or something where that's gone into more detail?
The question is there a workshop that gives you more detail about certified firms beyond the requirement that there be a commercially useful function? And in response to that question, yes. There are workshops that would cover that, and those would be the ones that are about how to become certified. And there's one called, you're certified, now what? And so those workshops are going to get into the detail of what the expectations of you are, not only in the certification process, but once you're certified, because it gets into maintaining your certification. But then also, now what? Well, not only now what as in how to get work or how to network, but once you're on a contract, how is it that you're going to meet compliance requirements, including commercially useful function, but additional requirements as well. So yes, those workshops I think would be helpful to your question.
We offer a proprietary type service, and we're a satellite office here in Illinois. Work is being done elsewhere in the country. We're the only ones that do that type of service. And we don't have a big office. We don't have a lot of cleaning that needs to be done, or trucking that needs to be done. How do we become, or how do we satisfy the MBE requirements?
Well, I think there's two. Well, the question is if you have a proprietary service, you're the only vendor that can provide that service, I presume, and the project has MBE/WBE goals, and you're unable to meet those goals. How is it that you can meet your compliance? So the first response I want to say is if you truly are a service that has proprietary protection and you're the only one that either by law or just for all practical purposes are you the only vendor that can provide the services, then you might be considered a sole source, and under the law we award a sole source contract under the Illinois Municipal Purchasing Act without competition, and it's allowed by law. There is a process for that. It is called the non-competitive review board process. What happens is when the user departments realize a need that they have, and through market research or otherwise they confirm that there is only one vendor out in the world that can provide a certain service, then they will submit a request to us to have the matter heard by the non-competitive review board. The non-competitive review board will then vote on whether or not to recommend that it is a sole source, and they will pass that recommendation on to the Chief Procurement Officer. And if it truly is a sole source, then the CPO can award a sole source contract. During that process, we don't just throw the MBE/WBE participation out the window. But I talked about reductions and waivers earlier. That possibility is there even in the sole source process. So if it is documented that there's really no way that you can have MBE/WBE participation, then there's a possibility of a reduction and waiver during the award process of a sole source contract. So that, I think, answers one question for you. As far as the actual participation, beyond that, I have to say that you know, you should exercise every bit of diligence to try and seek out MBE, WBE, DBE participation, because it will be scrutinized. But to answer your question is, if there's no firms out there that are eligible, and we need the services, and you in fact are a sole source, you know, maybe you have a copyright on some software that we need, that we absolutely need, or maybe you have a patent on a product that we absolutely need. If we need it, we got to go to you. And if we got to go to you and you can prove to us that you cannot get participation, a reduction or waiver may be possible.